Hello, Network to Code community. My name is Tim Fiola. I'm a developer advocate here at Network to Code, and today we're going to be going through a complete walkthrough of Nautobot 1.0 installation. So recall last week, if you saw it, we published a blog on this exact same topic. This video is meant to either complement that blog post or to serve as a standalone installation guide. Note that the blog post covers a bit more background information as you're installing Nautobot. It gives a little bit more insight as to what's going on as you're doing some stuff, while this blog is mainly going to focus on getting Nautobot installed and will not have as much background on all the stuff that's happening underneath the covers. All right, with that, let's go ahead and get started. We'll be following the Nautobot installation documentation. So this documentation has been developed and scrubbed extensively so that it to be easy and reliable. If you find something that is unexpected, that deviates from the installation documentation when you are installing Nautobot, do let us know. The best way to do that is to hit us up in the Network to Code Slack channel, which if you are not a member, you can join here at slack.networktocode.com and then go to the Nautobot channel. Okay. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. We will be installing this on the Ubuntu 20.4.2 LTS release. Okay. And here we go. So as we scroll through this documentation, note that there's some pre-work we have to do to install the infrastructure that Nautobot needs to run. So Nautobot requires a database to run. And in order to install the database, you have to install Python, PostgreSQL, and Redis. Once we do that, then we'll be ready to actually install Nautobot. So what we're doing now is like the pre-work for the dependencies. So we'll go ahead and scroll down here in the documentation, and we are going to click on the installing Nautobot dependencies on Ubuntu link. Let's get started with the installation of the dependencies. So the first thing we're going to do, and as I go through this, I want to note this, I'm just going to be copying and pasting from the documentation directly into the terminal here. It's designed to be that easy. So we'll go ahead and do that. I'll go ahead and copy this, and we'll go ahead and update apt. Great. And now that we've done that, we'll go ahead and install all the dependency packages. This will take a moment. Great, so the packages are all installed now. Now we'll go ahead and create the database. So we'll go ahead and sudo to the Postgres user and roll from there. Okay, so the first step here, once we're in the database environment, is to create the actual database itself called Nautobot. We'll now create a Nautobot user and assign that user a password. Insecure password is what I'm using here. Terrible example, don't use it. Use something that's valid for a good production install. And the next step here is then to grant all the privileges for the Nautobot database to the Nautobot user. Great. So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and validate the status of the database. So this password I'm entering here, this is the password we defined up here. Okay, great. Now that we're into the environment here, go ahead and verify your connection info. And this looks good and as expected. So we'll go ahead and quit out of here and proceed with the Redis setup. And with Redis, we already installed the Redis package, so we'll just give it a ping, make sure we get a pong back, and there we go. All right, we're ready now to proceed to the next step, to deploy Nautobot. The next step here during the installation process is to choose your Nautobot root directory. This directory is going to have everything, all the packages related to Nautobot and all the information related to Nautobot. So in this example here, we're going to go ahead and use the opt Nautobot directory as the Nautobot root, but you are welcome to use whatever directory suits your purpose. So we'll go ahead and create the Nautobot user. Okay. And we're going to give it the home directory of opt Nautobot, which is our Nautobot root directory. Great, so that's done. Now we'll go ahead and deal with the virtual environment. So we're going to, so let's just go ahead and take a look at the Nautobot root directory. There's nothing there, right? All right, so let's go ahead and set up the virtual environment. Then we'll take a look at what happens after we set up the virtual environment within the opt Nautobot directory. Okay, so with that, we have, with the virtual environment, we see more directories here and a file. One of the directories being bin. Okay, so just take note of that as we proceed through this, because that'll become important if you want to understand what's going on with the Nautobot user and the virtual environment. Let's go ahead and proceed here. Let's go ahead and update the bash RC. So up to this point, we've said, hey, opt Nautobot in this case is going to be our Nautobot root directory, but we haven't set anything in the environment for it. This is where we're going to do that right now. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. We're also going to update the bash RC file for Nautobot to set this Nautobot root directory, so it'll be there the next time we log in. Great. Now we'll go ahead and sudo to the Nautobot user. There we are. Let's go ahead and take a look at our Nautobot root directory. As expected, it is opt Nautobot. Great. Okay, now let's go ahead and explore the virtual environment here. So we'll go ahead and echo the path. And again, we are on Ubuntu here. And notice that in the documentation and in my terminal here, the first directory on the path is opt Nautobot bin. Okay. So what that means is when we install the virtual environment, the bin directory appeared here in opt Nautobot, and we've also set that as the first directory on our path. So what that means is the Nautobot user will automatically access the virtual environment without having to explicitly instantiate the network environment, because we are the first directory on our path is the bin directory, which was created by the virtual environment. Okay. So if we take a look at like which pip3, which is the next step here, we're using the opt Nautobot bin pip3 instantiation. Okay. So this will make sure that the version of Python you're using, as well as any other dependencies, remain isolated in the virtual environment for the Nautobot user. So now we'll go ahead and upgrade pip in the virtual environment, and we'll also key it to install wheel packages if they're available, which this wheel capability makes it quicker and safer to install packages because it doesn't require some extra information. Great, we're updated there. We're updated there. Now is the big step here. We'll go ahead and install Nautobot, and to keep even with our blog, which installed Nautobot 1.0.0, we're going to go ahead and specify that. But if you don't want to, if you want to install the latest version, go ahead and just don't specify this last part here. And here we go, we're installing Nautobot. Version 1.0. Great, there we go. Okay, now we'll go ahead and verify the Nautobot installation. 1.0.0 as expected. Now the next step now is to configure Nautobot. So the first step in that is to initialize the Nautobot server configuration file. So we'll go ahead and use this Nautobot server init, and that'll create this configuration file within our Nautobot root directory, which again in our case is opt Nautobot. If you chose something different, you'll see that file in a different location. So if we just go ahead and edit that file, there's a few different settings in this file that you will have to modify in order to get Nautobot to work. So the first one we're going to look at is the allowed hosts. So there's a few things we can do here. If you are looking for just a quick start with a minimum of fuss, you can just do the star for this, which is a wildcard, which will accept anything. Or you can specify something more specific. So this allowed host value is going to be what the URL by which you access the Nautobot web UI. So just to be a little bit more specific for this example, I'm going to do 192.168, the IP address of my Nautobot server. Okay. Next thing you need to do is specify the Nautobot user, which is Nautobot, and then the password for the database we defined, the Nautobot database, and recall that we had this terrible insecure password. Again, don't use this password in production. We're just doing this for demo purposes right now. So if you're running Redis on the same server that you're running Nautobot on, which we are doing in this example, in this simple example, you don't need to mess with any Redis settings. So we'll go ahead and leave those alone. Go ahead and write that file. Now we're going to move on to optional settings. So Nautobot can take advantage of some optional packages that give it some extra capabilities that are not required but are handy to have. One of those additional packages that Nautobot can work with is Napalm, which comes in very handy to get information from network elements. So we'll go ahead and install that as an example of an optional setting. So what we do here is we'll just go ahead and echo that into this local requirements. And then if we cat that, it just says napalm as expected. Great. Now we're going to go ahead and prepare the database. So this will prepare the database for use. It'll set the database up. So if we go Nautobot server migrate, we're on this step right here. And as we go through this, as you see all this output here, notice what it's doing. It's setting up the database. It's doing a bunch of database tables, making some different linkages and whatnot to the database to set it up. Great. Next step is to create a super user. This super user is going to be the user that you use to access the Nautobot web UI for the first time. Then once you're in the web UI, you can define other users, define permissions for those users, and other administrative things. So we'll go ahead and do this Nautobot server create super user. The email address is optional. You don't have to do it, so I'll go ahead and skip it. Great. There we go. And now the next step here is to create the static directories. These directories will hold files that Nautobot needs to function. So we'll go ahead and do that. This command will make sure all the files and directories are present in the Nautobot root directory. Okay, great. Now we can get on to installing those optional local requirements we talked about before. So if we just grab this, if you didn't specify any local requirements for optional packages, you can skip this step safely. So this is going to be installing Napalm. There we go. The next step is to just check the configuration. It's a good habit to do this whenever you're about to start the server. Great, no issues identified. All right, so what we're going to do now is go ahead and start the development server. Now, this server is not, it's not okay to use this in production. It's not performant enough, nor is it secure enough to run in production. Great, here we go. So now we'll go ahead and access. And when you're accessing this, when you're putting in the URL for Nautobot, keep in mind, this has to be in that allowed hosts value you defined in the Nautobot config file. So, and we are 11, and then notice that we have to access on port 8080. Great. So what we see now is a locked down UI because we haven't logged in yet. And notice that you get all this debug output from the Nautobot dev server running. Okay, so let's go ahead and log in with that super user info we just defined. Great. Now we have an unlocked UI. Okay. All right. All right. So the next thing we'll do here is define the Nautobot system services. That'll be the next step here. So proceed to this link right here at the bottom. Okay. So this next step will go through, this next section will go through deploying the Nautobot services. So we'll go ahead and stop this dev server right here. We don't need that anymore. And as the Nautobot user, we need to copy this into this information into this file in the Nautobot root directory. So, and we can just go ahead and copy this. All right. Into that file, do a right quit, and there we go. The next step will be setting up systemd. So what we're going to do now for these next couple steps, we need to be a user with root permissions. So I will go ahead and exit from this Nautobot user, which dumps me back out to my root enabled user, Tim. So first thing we'll do is copy this information into this file here in systemd for the Nautobot service. There we go. Oh, geez. I forgot to do sudo, so that on me. There we go. Sudo much? Okay, now we'll go ahead and define the Nautobot worker service. Okay. And for that, we can go ahead and copy that and just paste that right into this file. Great. Now we'll go ahead and reload the systemd. Okay, now we'll go ahead and start the Nautobot services. The Nautobot and Nautobot worker services for the two files we just copied and pasted up there. All right. Now let's go ahead and check on the Nautobot service. You should see this service active and running. Okay. Now, if you're having some problems, there's a troubleshooting section down here at the bottom of the page. Okay. But barring that, let's go ahead to the next step. Okay, let's go ahead and configure our HTTP server. This is the last step of the process to get Nautobot up and running. So the next step right here is to obtain an SSL certificate. So for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to use a self-signed certificate because getting another type of certificate is outside the scope of this overview of the installation. However, you can reference the Nautobot blog, the install blog from last week, where I do go through how I went ahead and got a signed certificate, a trusted certificate, excuse me, from Let's Encrypt, and that is completely free. But the blog does walk through that process from Let's Encrypt. Okay. So with that, we will go ahead and copy this command down here to create a self-signed certificate. All right. All these questions here are optional. If you're just doing this to get up and started, don't worry about answering all these. You can just return through them. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and install the Nginx server. On Ubuntu, we'll go ahead and install it. This is kind of an extensive install. Great, so that's done. And now we'll go ahead and configure Nginx. So we'll take the Ubuntu file site and we'll VI it, and we are the root user again. And on Ubuntu, you can just copy and paste this file. So if you are running on CentOS, notice that we've specified the certificate and key locations here. On CentOS and Red Hat, it will be different. Okay, so you'll need to specify where those actually ended up. Okay? But since we're on Ubuntu, we just kept it as is. So now we're going to go ahead and enable Nautobot. Go ahead and delete this file. And do a symlink. Specified here. All right, now we'll go ahead and restart Nginx. Great. So this is more important for the CentOS or Red Hat installations, but the permissions on the Nautobot root directory are very important. If they are not set to 755, you will get a failure on the CentOS Red Hat because the directory does not default to those permissions. In Ubuntu, geez. On Ubuntu, it defaults to the 755 already, so you don't have to worry about it. But again, on CentOS or Red Hat, you will most likely have to explicitly change these directory permissions, or else you will run into a problem. Okay, at this point, let's go ahead and connect to Nautobot now in our browser. Okay, so we'll have the same URL we did before, but we'll go ahead and remove the 8080. And we will get this. We're using a self-signed certificate in this exercise here. And since we are, Chrome won't even let me go to the page. It won't even give me an option to go to the page. So in order to get around this, You have to type in "this is unsafe" into the browser, just anywhere in the browser. You won't see the queue that you're typing it, and then it will let you get to the Nautobot web UI. And here we go. I'm still logged in from my prior login on the dev server, and you see the unlocked UI here, and it's ready to go. So this concludes the installation video for this. Again, if your experience varies on this, if you run into something in your installation that is not documented, please do let us know. One of the best ways to do that, again, is on the Network to Code Slack, specifically the Nautobot channel, and let us know what's going on, and we'll take a look at it. You can also open an issue on GitHub. So with that, I'll go ahead and wrap this up. Have an awesome rest of your day, and thank you very much. Bye.